The string quartet's melody floated through the air at Riverside Manor as I adjusted my tie for the 100th time. Watching 300 guests settle into their seats. 6 years of dreaming about this moment, 6 years of saving every penny, to give Sarah the wedding she deserved, and now my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Not from nerves about marriage, I'd been ready for that since our second date, but from something else entirely. The way Sarah kept glancing toward the entrance. The way she'd been checking her phone obsessively all morning. The way she'd gone completely silent when I mentioned how perfect everything looked. "David, are you ready?" Pastor Mitchell approached. With his warm smile, the same one that had officiated dozens of weddings at this very spot overlooking the Willamette River. I nodded, though my mouth felt like I'd swallowed cotton. Sarah appeared at the back of the aisle in her grandmother's vintage lace dress. For a moment, everything felt right again. She was breathtaking, absolutely radiant, and I remembered why I'd fallen so hard for the ambitious marketing executive, who'd somehow chosen a quiet software engineer like me. But as she walked down the aisle, her eyes weren't on mine. They were scanning the crowd, searching for something or someone. When we reached the part about speaking now or forever holding your peace, my heart nearly stopped. Sarah's grip on my hands loosened, and she turned toward the congregation with an expression I'd never seen before. "I'm sorry," she whispered, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "I need to say something before we continue." The pastor looked confused, the guests stirred uneasily, and I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Sarah's eyes had found what? They were looking for a tall, impeccably dressed man standing near the back. Someone I hadn't seen in 3 years, but would recognize anywhere. Marcus Rivera, her college boyfriend who'd supposedly moved to London for business and never looked back. "Marcus," Sarah called out, her voice breaking slightly. "You came back?" The silence that followed was deafening. 300 people held their breath as my fiancée, the woman who was supposed to become my wife in the next 10 minutes, took off her engagement ring and held it out toward another man. The morning had started like any other wedding day, though looking back there were signs I should have noticed. Sarah had been distant for weeks, claiming wedding stress. But it went deeper than choosing between salmon or chicken for the reception dinner. She'd started taking long phone calls in private, saying they were work emergencies that couldn't wait. Her laptop, which used to stay open on our kitchen counter, suddenly required passwords and stayed locked in her study when I'd suggested we honeymoon in Italy like we'd always planned. She'd suggested postponing the trip indefinitely. I'd attributed it all to pre-wedding jitters. After all, we'd been together since our junior year at Portland State University. And Sarah had always been the ambitious one with big dreams. When she landed her position at Williams & Associates marketing agency right after graduation, I was proud of her success, even though it meant long hours and weekend work. When her parents made it clear that my software engineering salary wasn't quite what they'd envisioned for their daughter, I worked overtime at Morrison Tech Solutions to prove I could provide for her. She mentioned feeling overwhelmed by planning the wedding while managing her biggest client campaign. I hired a wedding planner and handled most of the details myself. Everything I did was to make her happy, to show her and her family that despite coming from Selwood's modest middle-class neighborhood instead of the Pearl District's luxury condos, I was worthy of their daughter. My parents, Robert and Linda Chen, had sacrificed to send me to college, and I'd inherited their work ethic, while Sarah's father, James Williams, had built a successful marketing empire. My dad, Robert, had spent 30 years as a postal worker, saving every extra dollar for my education. The contrast was stark, but I'd believed love could bridge any gap. That morning, as I'd gotten ready in the hotel room I'd booked for privacy, Sarah had sent a text saying she loved me and couldn't wait to be my wife. I'd read it probably 50 times, using it to calm my nerves about the expensive venue, the elaborate flowers, the champagne that cost more than my monthly car payment. Everything had been chosen to impress her family and friends, to show that David Chen might not have been born into wealth, but he could certainly aspire to it. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd been so focused on proving myself worthy that I'd missed the signs of losing her entirely. Marcus stood in the back of the venue like he owned the place, which in many ways he probably felt he did. 3 years in London had polished him even further designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. It's a confident posture that spoke of international business deals and first-class flights. He was everything Sarah's parents had probably hoped she'd end up with originally, before she'd settled for the earnest but ordinary software engineer who'd tutored her in computer science and somehow captured her heart. Or so I'd thought. Sarah, what are you doing? I managed to ask, though my voice sounded foreign to my own ears. The pastor shifted uncomfortably, probably wondering if this was some elaborate wedding surprise he hadn't been briefed on. My parents sat in the third row, my mother's face already showing the mortification I felt building in my chest. Sarah's parents looked less surprised and more resigned, as if they'd been expecting this moment. David, I'm sorry, but I can't do this, Sarah said, finally turning back to me. Marcus came back last week. He called off his engagement in London. He said he made a mistake leaving, that he never stopped loving me. Her voice grew stronger with each word, as if she was convincing herself as much as explaining to me. We have unfinished business, and I can't start a marriage with you while my heart is somewhere else. The worst part wasn't the public humiliation, or the wasted money, or even the crushing disappointment. The worst part was the relief I saw in her eyes, as if she'd been carrying the weight of a lie, and finally felt free to drop it. Oh, this wasn't a moment of confusion or cold feet. This was a woman who'd found her way back to what she really wanted, and it wasn't me. Marcus walked down the aisle like he was the groom who'd been delayed by traffic, not the man who was about to destroy someone else's wedding day. When he reached the altar, he took Sarah's hands with the familiarity of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. I should have fought for you 3 years ago, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I should have never let business come between us. David, I'm sorry this happened this way, but Sarah and I, we have something that never really ended. Standing there in my rented tuxedo, surrounded by flowers I'd charged to credit cards and guests who'd traveled from across the country, I felt something crack inside my chest. Not just my heart, though, that was certainly broken, but something deeper. The carefully constructed belief that if I just worked hard enough, loved deeply enough, sacrificed completely enough, I could earn the devotion I'd been giving so freely. Sarah looked at me with tears in her eyes, but they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of relief mixed with guilt. The kind you cry when you're finally admitting a truth you've been hiding from yourself. David, you're a good man, and you deserve someone who loves you the way you love them. But that someone isn't me. It never really was, and I think deep down, we both knew that. The string quartet had stopped playing. 300 guests sat, in stunned silence. Pastor Mitchell cleared his throat and suggested we take a few minutes to sort things out privately. But there was nothing private about this moment. It was as public as heartbreak could get, witnessed by everyone who mattered, in both our lives, and in that moment, standing at the altar, where I'd planned to promise forever to someone who'd been planning her escape. I realized that the David Chen who'd walked into Riverside Manor that morning was about to die. What would emerge from the ashes of this humiliation remained to be seen. The rain started falling just as the last guest filed out of Riverside Manor, leaving behind overturned chairs and wilted boutonnieres scattered across the marble floor. I stood alone in the empty reception hall, still wearing my tuxedo, watching. The catering staff dismantled the elaborate display I'd spent months planning. The 7-tier cake remained untouched, its sugar flowers now seeming to mock the celebration that never happened. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages I couldn't bring myself to read, each notification feeling like another small knife twisting in my chest. Sarah had left with Marcus without a backward glance, her wedding dress trailing behind her as they disappeared into his black Tesla. I'd watched them through the floor-to-ceiling windows, noting how icily she'd slipped back into the passenger seat of his life, as if the 6 years we'd spent together had been nothing more than an intermission in their real story. The venue coordinator, a kind woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, approached me hesitantly with paperwork about the reception that would never happen, but I couldn't focus on her words. Everything sounded muffled, like I was underwater. My parents had left shortly after Sarah's dramatic exit. My mother, Linda's face streaked with tears of embarrassment, and my father, Robert's jaw set in the stern expression he wore when deeply disappointed. They'd muttered something about needing time to process what had happened, but their body language spoke volumes. This wasn't just my humiliation, it was theirs too. The wedding they'd helped pay for despite their modest means, the celebration they'd bragged about to their neighbors and coworkers. It turned into a public spectacle that would be whispered about for months. Even worse were Sarah's parents, Patricia and James Williams, who'd approached me after the chaos with expressions that somehow managed to be both apologetic and relieved. "David, we're sorry it happened this way," Patricia had said, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she adjusted her silk scarf. "Perhaps it's for the best." Sarah was never truly happy, and we all knew it. Sometimes love isn't enough. The casual cruelty of her words, delivered with the same tone she might use to discuss the weather, had left me speechless. The drive back to our shared apartment in Selwood felt surreal. Sarah's BMW was already gone from the driveway, along with the expensive luggage set she'd bought for our honeymoon. Inside, the space we'd called home for 3 years felt hollow and strange. Her coffee mug still sat in the sink from that morning, lipstick stain still visible on the rim. The wedding gifts that had arrived early were stacked in neat piles throughout the living room, crystal vases, silver picture frames, kitchen appliances that would never prepare meals for the family we'd planned to build together. I found the note on our bedroom dresser, written in Sarah's careful handwriting on the expensive stationery her mother had given her. "David, I've taken only what I brought into our relationship. The apartment is yours if you want it, but I understand if you need to move. I'll be staying with Marcus at the Heathman Hotel until we figure out our next steps. I know you hate me right now, and I don't blame you. What I did was terrible, but staying would have been worse for both of us. You deserve someone who chooses you first, always. I hope someday you'll understand, Sarah." The clinical tone of her farewell, as if she were ending a business partnership rather than a 6-year relationship, should have made me angry. Instead, it left me feeling empty. I sat on the edge of our bed, still in my wedding tuxedo, and tried to remember the last time Sarah had looked at me the way she'd looked at Marcus at the altar. The way her face had lit up, the way her whole body had seemed to come alive in his presence. Had she ever looked at me like that? Or had I been so desperate for her love that I'd imagined it? Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our relationship, searching for clues I'd missed. The way she'd started working late more often when Marcus began calling again, how she'd grown distant when planning our future, changing the subject whenever I mentioned children or growing old together, the expensive clothes and jewelry she'd been buying lately, claiming they were necessary for client meetings, but looking more like the wardrobe of someone preparing for a different life entirely. By morning, my phone had accumulated dozens of messages from friends, family, and coworkers who'd witnessed the disaster. Most were sympathetic, expressing shock and offering support, but reading them felt like reliving the humiliation over and over again. Kevin Park from work had sent a particularly kind message. "Brother, I can't believe what happened. Take all the time you need. The project can wait." But even his kindness felt tainted by pity, and pity was the last thing I could handle right now. The worst message came from Sarah herself, sent at 3 a.m. "David, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know this wasn't planned." Marcus showed up unexpectedly, and seeing him again made me realize I'd been lying to myself about my feelings. I tried to ignore it, tried to go through with the wedding because you're such a good man and you deserve happiness. But I couldn't promise forever when my heart was already somewhere else. "I hope you can forgive me someday." Her words were carefully chosen, probably crafted with Marcus's help, designed to absolve her of guilt while painting herself as noble, for not going through with a loveless marriage. But what struck me most was what she didn't say. No acknowledgement of the money I'd spent, the dreams I'd invested, the life I'd built around her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. No recognition that she'd known about Marcus's return for a week and had chosen to let me go. Through with wedding preparations anyway. hiring vendors and finalizing details for a celebration she'd already decided would never happen. The Monday. Morning after my ruined wedding, I called in sick to Morrison Tech Solutions for the first time in 3 years. The thought of facing my coworkers, answering their concerned questions, or pretending to focus on code when my entire world had imploded, felt impossible. Instead, I drove aimlessly around Portland, ending up at Washington Park, where Sarah and I had gone on our first official date. The rose garden was in full bloom, couples walking hand in hand between the flower beds, and the sight made my stomach turn. That's when I noticed Marcus's Tesla parked near the Japanese garden entrance. Through the windshield, I could see him and Sarah sitting close together, her head on his shoulder as they looked out at the city skyline. They looked peaceful. Content like they belonged together in a way that Sarah and I never had. She was wearing the blue dress I'd bought her for her birthday last year. The one she'd claimed was too fancy for everyday wear, but apparently perfect for reuniting with her true love. Watching them together, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, but a cold clarity that cut through the fog of heartbreak and self-pity. Sarah had made her choice, but more importantly, she'd shown me exactly where I stood in her priorities. 6 years of devotion, financial sacrifice, and emotional investment had been discarded the moment someone better came along. The woman I'd planned to spend my life with had been keeping me as a placeholder, a safe backup option, while she waited for her real story to begin. The drive home felt different this time. Instead of returning to wallow in the apartment filled with broken dreams, I found myself making mental notes of what needed to change. The joint bank account that still held our honeymoon money, the lease that had both our names on it, the shared phone plan, the insurance policies, the intertwined financial life we'd built together. Sarah might have walked away from our relationship as easily as changing clothes, but extracting myself from the practical entanglements would take time and planning. More importantly, I realized I needed to extract myself from the version of David Chen who'd spent 6 years trying to be worthy of someone who'd never truly wanted him. The man who'd worked overtime to afford the engagement ring she'd handed to another man. The man who'd apologized for not being sophisticated enough, wealthy enough, connected enough to deserve a place in her world. That version of myself had died at the altar of Riverside Manor, and whoever emerged from this wreckage would be someone entirely different. The phone rang just as I pulled into my driveway. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, but for the first time in 6 years, I didn't feel compelled to answer immediately. Let it ring, I thought. Whatever she had to say could wait. The new David Chen had more important things to figure out than making himself available for the woman who'd abandoned him at the altar. The week after the wedding disaster, I returned to Morrison Tech Solutions expecting sympathy and maybe some awkward conversations about what everyone had witnessed. Instead, I walked into something far worse. Kevin Park intercepted me at the elevator with an expression I'd never seen before, part embarrassment and part genuine concern. "David, man, we need to talk before you go upstairs," he said, guiding me toward the coffee shop in the building's lobby. "There's been some developments while you were out." What Kevin told me over lukewarm coffee felt like a second punch to the gut. Marcus hadn't just returned to steal my fiancée, he'd also been hired as the new director of business development at Morrison Tech, a position that had been created specifically for him while I was planning my wedding. Apparently, his London connections and international business experience made him exactly what the company needed to expand into European markets. The position came with a corner office, a substantial salary increase over my own, and worst of all, authority over several projects I'd been leading. "Who authorized this?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Kevin shifted uncomfortably in his chair, confirming my fears without words. Sarah's father, James Williams, had significant influence in Portland's business community, and Morrison Tech had been courting Williams and Associates for a potential partnership. Marcus's hire wasn't just about his qualifications, it was about cementing relationships that would benefit both companies. The fact that it would also ensure my daily humiliation was probably just a convenient bonus. Walking into the office felt like entering enemy territory. Marcus had already settled into his new role, his expensive suits and confident demeanor commanding immediate respect from colleagues who had known me for years. During the morning meeting, he outlined his vision for international expansion with the kind of polished presentation that made my technical reports look amateur by comparison. When he assigned me to work on data analysis for his European market research, the irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The jilted groom was now reporting to the man who'd stolen his bride. The lunch invitation came that same day, delivered by Amanda Torres from HR, with an expression that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. Marcus Rivera would like to schedule a lunch meeting to discuss your role in the upcoming project, she said, avoiding eye contact. He suggested Canopy Restaurant downtown, tomorrow at noon. The choice of venue was deliberate. Canopy was where Sarah and I had celebrated our engagement, and where she'd no doubt told Marcus about our relationship history. I arrived at Canopy the next day, determined to maintain my professionalism, but Marcus had other plans. He'd reserved the same corner table where Sarah and I had shared champagne 18 months earlier, and he was wearing the watch I recognized as Sarah's wedding gift to him, the Rolex. So socially returned to the jewelry store. His smile was predatory as he stood to shake my hand, the gesture of a man who'd won everything and wanted to make sure his defeated opponent knew it. "David, thank you for agreeing to meet," Marcus said, his tone perfectly cordial and completely condescending. "I wanted to clear the air about our working relationship. I know this situation is unusual, but I hope we can maintain professionalism despite the personal circumstances." You ordered the most expensive wine on the menu without consulting me, then proceeded to discuss his plans for my career as if he were doing me a favor by keeping me employed. "I've reviewed your work history," he continued, cutting into his perfectly prepared salmon. "You're clearly talented, but you lack the strategic vision needed for senior positions. I think you'll find working under my guidance will expand your skill set significantly." The casual cruelty of his words, delivered with the same confidence he'd shown while stealing my fiancée, revealed exactly what this lunch was really about. This wasn't a professional discussion, it was a victory lap. "Sarah mentioned you're quite dedicated," Marcus added, taking a sip of wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "She said you've always been willing to put in extra hours, work weekends, whatever it takes to get the job done." That's exactly the kind of commitment I need for this European project. I hope I can count on that same level of dedication. The pause before the last word was deliberate, loaded with meaning that made my jaw clench. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as business planning. Marcus outlined his expectations for my role, which essentially amounted to doing the technical heavy lifting while he took credit for the strategic decisions. He mentioned several times how grateful I should be that the company was keeping me on despite the awkward circumstances, and how my future at Morrison Tech depended on proving I could separate personal feelings from professional responsibilities. When he started talking about Sarah, I nearly walked out. "She's doing well, by the way," he said casually, as if discussing the weather. "The transition has been challenging for her, of course. She feels terrible about how everything happened, but she's relieved to finally be honest about her feelings. We're looking at apartments in the Pearl District, somewhere that better suits our lifestyle." The message was clear. While I was stuck in my modest Selwood apartment, they were moving on to bigger and better things. The final insult came when he insisted on paying for lunch, pulling out a platinum credit card with a flourish. "This one's on me," he said with false magnanimity. "Consider it a welcome to the team gesture. I have a feeling we're going to work very well together." The transaction felt symbolic, another small demonstration of his superior position in every aspect of life that had once been mine. Returning to the office after that lunch, I felt something crystallize inside me that had been building since the wedding. This wasn't just about losing Sarah anymore. It was about watching someone systematically dismantle my life, while expecting me to be grateful for the privilege. Marcus hadn't just stolen my fiancée, he'd moved into my professional space and was now working to undermine my career while wearing the watch my ex-bride had given him. That evening, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by returned wedding gifts, and began researching Marcus Rivera more thoroughly than I'd ever researched any work project. His LinkedIn profile was impressive, but vague about specific accomplishments. His company history showed a pattern of short-term positions with international consulting firms, always moving on just before major project completions. Most interesting were the gaps in his timeline, particularly a 6-month period 2 years ago that wasn't accounted for anywhere in his professional narrative. The deeper I dug, the more questions arose. Marcus's London engagement, which Sarah had mentioned as the reason for his return, wasn't mentioned anywhere in his social media history. His previous companies, when I reached out through professional networks, were surprisingly difficult to contact. A prestigious international. Deals he'd mentioned during his presentation at Morrison Tech couldn't be verified through normal business channels. For someone with such an impressive resume, Marcus Rivera left remarkably few digital footprints. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "David, I heard about your lunch with Marcus. I hope you can work together professionally. Your technical skills and thinks you have potential for growth in the company. Maybe this could be a fresh start for you." The patronizing tone. The assumption that I should be grateful for Marcus's professional evaluation. The complete disconnect from the emotional reality of the situation all confirmed what I'd been slowly realizing. Sarah had never truly known me at all. She'd seen me as a project to be managed. It's a reliable but uninspiring choice that satisfied her parents' desire for stability while she waited for something better to come along. The David Chen she'd agreed to marry was a placeholder. Someone safe and predictable who would provide security while she built her career and maintained her options. The real David Chen, with his own ambitions and self-respect, had never factored into her calculations. That night, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. Instead of responding to Sarah's text or accepting my diminished role at Morrison Tech, I began planning something else entirely. Marcus wanted to play games. Sarah wanted to watch from the sidelines while her new boyfriend systematically humiliated her ex-fiancé. Then they were about to discover that the mild-mannered software engineer they'd both underestimated had depths they'd never imagined. The first step was obvious. Learn everything possible about Marcus Rivera's real background and current vulnerabilities. The second step would be leveraging that information at exactly the right moment. I'd spent 6 years being the accommodating boyfriend, the understanding partner, the grateful employee. It was time to discover what kind of man I could be when I stopped caring about everyone else's approval and started focusing on my own interests. Marcus Rivera thought he'd won everything, but the game was just beginning. 3 weeks of investigation had yielded exactly what I'd suspected about Marcus Rivera. The man who'd waltzed back into Portland, claiming international success, was actually running from a scandal in London that would destroy both his reputation and Sarah's if it came to light. His former business partner, a woman named Catherine Mills, had filed fraud charges against their consulting firm just days before Marcus's sudden departure. The European expansion deals he'd bragged about during his Morrison Tech presentation were fabrications, and his prestigious client list was a mixture of companies that had dropped his services and businesses that had never heard of him. More damaging was what I discovered about his personal life. The engagement he'd supposedly broken off to return to Sarah had never existed. Instead, he'd been involved in a messy affair with a married client whose husband had threatened both legal action and physical violence when the relationship was exposed. Marcus hadn't returned to Portland out of love for Sarah. He'd fled London to escape the consequences of his own reckless behavior and saw reconnecting with his wealthy ex-girlfriend as his best option for financial and social rehabilitation. The evidence sat in neat folders on my kitchen table, printed emails and financial records. That painted a picture of a man whose entire professional and personal life was built on deception. But having the ammunition wasn't enough. I needed the perfect opportunity to deploy it. And that opportunity came sooner than expected. Morrison Tech was hosting its annual investor gala next Friday, a black tie event where Marcus planned to present his European expansion strategy to potential partners and board members. Sarah would be there as his date, and the entire Portland business community would be watching. The invitation had been sitting on my desk for weeks, back when I'd been planning to attend with Sarah as my wife. Now it represented something else. Entirely the stage for Marcus Rivera's very public downfall. I RSVP'd yes, and began preparing for an evening that would change everything. Meanwhile, the dynamics at Morrison Tech had grown increasingly unbearable. Marcus, had taken over my corner of the office, installing himself in the workspace where I'd spent 3 years building my reputation. He'd reassigned my projects to other team members while loading me with menial tasks that any junior developer could handle. During team meetings, he'd interrupt my contributions with condescending corrections or redirect conversations away from my areas of expertise. The message was clear. David Chen was being professionally neutered, reduced from a respected software engineer to little more than Marcus's personal assistant. The worst part was watching my colleagues adapt to the new hierarchy. Kevin Park, who'd been my friend and confidant for years, now deferred to Marcus in conversations where he'd once sought my input. Amanda Torres from HR treated our interactions with the careful politeness reserved for employees on thin ice. Even the senior partners who'd previously praised my work now seemed to view me as a liability, someone whose personal drama might affect the company's important new relationship with Williams and Associates. Sarah's involvement in this systematic humiliation became clear during a chance encounter at Blue Star Cafe downtown. I'd gone there for lunch, seeking refuge from the toxic atmosphere at work, when I spotted her at a corner table with Marcus's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Diana Walsh. They were reviewing what looked like organizational charts and employee files, spreading the documents across the table like military strategists planning a campaign. The key is making sure David doesn't feel completely marginalized, Sarah was saying as I approached close enough to overhear. If he quits outright, it looks vindictive. But if he stays in a reduced capacity, it demonstrates that Marcus is the bigger man, professionally speaking. The board will appreciate that kind of mature leadership. Her clinical analysis of my professional destruction, delivered in the same tone she'd once used to plan our wedding, revealed a level of calculation that left me breathless. Diana nodded approvingly. Oh, Marcus thinks David might try to make trouble, given how everything ended between you two. This approach keeps him contained while establishing Marcus's authority. Plus, having the ex-fiancés working under him sends a pretty clear message about who won. Their laughter felt like acid in my ears, but I forced myself to listen as they continued planning my career assassination. The European project is perfect for this, Sarah continued, flipping through what I now recognized as my personnel file. David's technical skills are solid, but he lacks the vision for strategic thinking. Having him work on data analysis while Marcus handles client relationships shows the natural hierarchy. It's almost poetic, really. The casual cruelty of her words, the complete absence of any recognition that she was discussing a human being whose life she'd systematically destroyed, crystallized my resolve like nothing else could have. That afternoon, I called in sick and spent the day finalizing my preparations for Friday's gala. The venue was the Portland Art Museum, an elegant space where Marcus would deliver his presentation to an audience of investors, board members, and business leaders. Security would be tight, but I'd be there as a legitimate attendee with access to the same networking reception where Marcus planned to schmooze potential partners. The beauty of my plan was its simplicity. I wouldn't need to break any rules or engage in elaborate deceptions. I'd simply present the truth at exactly the moment when it would cause maximum damage. The psychological preparation was as important as the logistical planning. For 3 weeks, I'd been the scorned ex-fiancé, the professional victim, the man everyone pitied but no one respected. Friday night would require a different version of David Chen, entirely someone confident enough to command attention, articulate enough to present complex information clearly, and ruthless enough to destroy 2 lives without flinching. Wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming the self-respect that had been slowly eroded over months of accommodation and compromise. Thursday evening brought an unexpected complication. Sarah appeared at my apartment door the first time. She'd been there since abandoning our wedding. She looked exhausted, her usual polished appearance slightly frayed around the edges. "David, we need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the living room where our wedding gifts still sat in unopened boxes. "Marcus is worried about you." She began settling onto the couch we'd picked out together during happier times. "He thinks you're not adjusting well to the new working relationship. And frankly, your behavior at the office has been concerning. Taking sick days, avoiding team meetings, not participating in collaborative projects. It's not like you." Her voice carried the same patronizing concern she'd once used when discussing my career prospects with her parents. "We both know this. Situation is difficult," she continued, "but you're a professional, and I hoped you'd handle it with more maturity. Marcus has been incredibly gracious about everything, and the least you could do is show some appreciation for his willingness to work with you despite the personal complications." The irony of being lectured about maturity by the woman who abandoned me at the altar for her college boyfriend wasn't lost on me. "Marcus suggested that maybe a fresh start somewhere else might be better for everyone," Sarah said, producing a business card from her purse. "He has connections at several tech companies in Seattle. Nothing as senior as your current position, of course, but opportunities where you could rebuild your career without the constant reminders of what happened between us." The offer was presented as generosity, but the underlying message was clear: leave Portland voluntarily or be forced out professionally. "Think about it, David," she said, standing to leave. "You're a good person, and you deserve to be happy. But that's not going to happen here. Watching Marcus and me build our life together while you're stuck in the past. Sometimes the kindest thing is letting go." Her hand briefly touched my shoulder in a gesture that might once have been comforting, but now felt like a final insult. After she left, I sat in the silence of my apartment and felt the last vestiges of doubt about my plan evaporate. Sarah and Marcus weren't just content with having destroyed my personal life, they wanted to drive me out of my professional life as well. To complete the humiliation by forcing me to flee Portland like a defeated exile. The assumption that I would quietly accept their generous offer to disappear revealed how completely they'd underestimated who I'd become in the ashes of their betrayal. Friday couldn't come soon enough. The Portland Art Museum Gala would be the stage for Marcus Rivera's presentation, but it would also be the venue for his destruction. Sarah thought she was protecting her new relationship by encouraging me to leave town, but she was actually ensuring that she'd have a front row seat for the explosion that would destroy everything they'd built on the foundation of my shattered dreams. The Portland Art Museum's grand ballroom buzzed with the energy of Portland's business elite as I adjusted my bow tie and surveyed the crowd. Marcus stood near the presentation screen, resplendent in his designer tuxedo, charming a group of potential investors with his practiced smile. Sarah glowed beside him in a midnight blue gown I'd never seen before, her arm linked through his as she played the perfect corporate girlfriend. They looked like the power couple they'd always dreamed of being, completely unaware that their carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. I'd timed my arrival perfectly, entering during the cocktail hour, when everyone was relaxed and social. The folders containing Marcus's real background sat in my briefcase, but I wouldn't need them immediately. First, I wanted to enjoy watching him deliver his fraudulent presentation to the very people who would soon learn the truth about his fabricated credentials. Marcus took the podium with confidence that would have been admirable if it weren't built entirely on lies. His presentation was polished, filled with impressive graphics and ambitious projections for Morrison Tech's European expansion. He spoke eloquently about his London connections, his successful track record with international clients, and his vision for transforming the company's global presence. The audience was captivated, board members nodding approvingly as Marcus painted pictures of unprecedented growth and profitability. "The partnerships I've cultivated over the past 3 years," as Marcus said, clicking to a slide showing logos of prestigious European firms, "position Morrison Tech to capture market share that our competitors can only dream of." These relationships, built on trust and proven results, are the foundation of our expansion strategy. Each word was delivered with conviction that almost made me believe he'd forgotten his own deceptions. When the presentation ended to enthusiastic applause, knew it was time. Rising from my seat in the back of the room, I made my way toward the front as Marcus fielded congratulatory comments from impressed investors. "Excuse me," I said loudly enough to capture the attention of nearby tables. "I have some additional information about Mr. Rivera's European connections that might interest the board." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. Marcus's confident expression flickered for just a moment before he recovered his composure. "David, I don't think this is the appropriate venue for internal company discussions," he said with forced diplomacy. But his voice carried an edge of warning. "Actually, I think our investors deserve complete transparency." I replied, opening my briefcase and withdrawing the first set of documents, especially regarding the fraud charges filed against Mr. Rivera's London consulting firm just 3 weeks ago. The words hit the room like a physical force, conversation stopping mid-sentence as people leaned forward to hear more. "That's completely false," Marcus said, his polished demeanor beginning to crack. "David, I understand you're upset about personal matters, but making wild accusations at a professional event is inappropriate and potentially libelous." Sarah had moved to his side, her face pale as she recognized that whatever was happening couldn't be contained with charm and deflection. I handed the first folder to board member Jennifer Stone, who'd been nodding approvingly during Marcus's presentation. "These are court documents from London showing fraud charges filed by Catherine Mills against Rivera International Consulting," said calmly, "along with financial records showing that the European clients Mr. Rivera claims to represent have never actually worked with him." The room erupted in murmurs as Jennifer Stone examined the documents, her expression growing increasingly grim. Marcus lunged forward, trying to snatch the folder, but I'd already distributed copies to 3 other board members. "These are fabrications," he insisted, his voice rising. "David is obviously trying to sabotage my career out of personal jealousy." "The second folder contains correspondence from Marcus's former business partner," I continued, maintaining my calm tone as chaos erupted around me, including emails discussing their plan to defraud clients through inflated billing and fictitious project deliverables. Mr. Rivera fled London to avoid prosecution, not to pursue opportunities with Morrison Tech. Sarah stepped forward, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "David, stop this immediately," she demanded. "You're humiliating yourself and everyone here with this pathetic display of jealousy." But her words lacked conviction as board members continued examining the evidence, their faces reflecting growing alarm and disgust. "The final folder," I said, producing the last set of documents, "contains photographs and financial records showing that Mr. Rivera's relationship with Ms. Williams began again 3 months ago, not 3 weeks. They've been planning this reunion while she was still engaged to me, using Morrison Tech's potential partnership with Williams and Associates as leverage for his hiring." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow, her carefully maintained composure shattered as she realized that Marcus had manipulated both her emotions and her family's business connections for his own gain. "That's not true," she whispered, but her voice carried no conviction as pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Marcus made one final attempt to salvage the situation. "These documents could be forgeries," he said desperately. "David has had weeks to fabricate evidence. This is nothing more than an elaborate revenge scheme by a bitter ex-fiancé." But his protests fell on deaf ears as security footage from London, airports and hotel records confirmed his presence during times that contradicted his official timeline. Within minutes, Morrison Tech's board had escorted Marcus from the building while Sarah stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, her fairy tale reunion exposed as an elaborate con game. The evening that was supposed to celebrate their triumph had become their complete destruction, witnessed by everyone who mattered in Portland's business community. 2 months later, I was packing my office at Morrison Tech for the last time, but not because I'd been forced out. A tech startup in Vancouver had offered me a senior position with equity options and creative freedom I'd never imagined possible. Marcus Rivera was facing extradition to London, his legal troubles having caught up with him at last. Sarah's family business had lost several major clients who questioned their judgment, and she'd quietly left Portland for a fresh start, somewhere that didn't know her story. Standing in my empty office, I reflected on the man I'd been 6 months earlier, eager to please, desperate for approval, willing to sacrifice my own worth for someone else's love. That version of David Chen had died at the altar of Riverside Manor. But what emerged from the ashes was something far stronger. I'd learned that respect couldn't be earned through accommodation, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is refuse to accept less than you deserve. My phone buzzed with a text from my new boss in Vancouver. "Looking forward to having you on the team, David. Your reputation for integrity and innovation precedes you." I smiled, picked up my final box, and walked toward a future where I'd never again mistake being useful for being valued. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.